There are rare moments in history when death seems to ignore its own boundaries. Moments when a body that is cold and motionless suddenly draws breath again. Moments when witnesses swear under oath that they saw something no one should ever see. Eliza Wells died twice in Charleston, South Carolina, in 1848. On both occasions, physicians confirmed her death. On both occasions, preparations for burial were carried out, and on both occasions, she returned. What medical journals refused to acknowledge, what Charleston's elite tried desperately to conceal alongside her vacant coffin, and what more than 36 witnesses later swore they saw with their own eyes remained hidden in private correspondence and sealed court records for more than a century. Tonight, you will hear what truly happened to the young woman who defied death not once, but twice. Before continuing with Eliza Wells' story, I want you to do something for me. If you're listening right now, leave a comment telling me what city or state you're from. I'm curious to see how far these dark stories travel. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because what you're about to hear may make you question everything you believe about life, death, and whatever exists in between. Now, let me take you back to a time when Charleston was a city of deep contradictions, and when the story of one young woman would shake the very foundations of what its people thought they understood. Charleston in 1848 was a city built on the forced labor of enslaved people, yet it prided itself on elegance and culture. The cobblestone streets of the French Quarter rang with the steady clip-clop of horses pulling carriages filled with ladies wrapped in silk and gentlemen wearing tar-darkened hats. Grand homes lined the Battery, their wide piazzas overlooking the harbor where ships unloaded cotton, rice, and human cargo. The air was thick with salt from the sea, softened by the sweetness of magnolia blossoms. During the summer months, the suffocating humidity made even the simple act of breathing feel like work. The Wells family occupied an unusual and fragile position within this rigidly divided society. Eliza's father, Marcus Wells, was a free black man, something exceedingly rare in the antebellum South. His freedom had been purchased by his own father, a skilled carpenter who saved for 2 decades to buy his son's liberty. Marcus inherited that same gift for working with wood and built a thriving furniture business that catered to some of Charleston's wealthiest white families. His craftsmanship was so refined that even customers steeped in prejudice swallowed their pride to commission his work. Marcus married Catherine, a woman of mixed ancestry whose grandmother had been a free woman of color from Haiti. Catherine worked as a seamstress, her intricate embroidery coveted by Charleston's elite women, many of whom would never allow her through their front doors, but eagerly paid high prices for her skill. Together, Marcus and Catherine managed to purchase a modest home on Beaufort Street, in a neighborhood where free people of color clustered together, forming a small enclave within the larger city. Eliza was her only child. She was born in 1832, when Catherine was nearly 40 years old, a miracle child, as her mother often called her. From the very beginning, Eliza was different. She showed remarkable intelligence, learning to read by the age of 4, simply by watching her mother study the Bible. By 7, she could calculate figures faster than her father and often helped him balance his business accounts. But it was her physical condition that truly set her apart. Eliza suffered from what doctors at the time referred to as cataleptic fits, sudden episodes during which her body would become rigid, her breathing would slow to almost nothing, and she would appear to slip completely out of consciousness. The first episode occurred when she was 9 years old. Her parents believed she had died. Catherine's screams brought neighbors rushing into the house, but nearly an hour later, Eliza simply opened her eyes and asked why everyone was crying. After that incident, Dr. Nathaniel Howell examined Eliza extensively. He was one of the few physicians in Charleston willing to treat free black patients. Thin and scholarly, with wire-rimmed spectacles and a perpetually anxious expression, Dr. Howell had studied medicine in Philadelphia and read about similar cases in European journals. In his cramped office above an apothecary shop, he explained the condition to Marcus and Catherine. It was a disorder of the nervous system. He said, the French called it catalepsy. The body entered a state that closely resembled death. The muscles stiffened, The heartbeat and breathing slowed until they were nearly impossible to detect. But the person was not truly dead, only suspended. Will she die from it? Catherine asked softly, her voice trembling. Dr. Howell removed his spectacles and cleaned them slowly, a habit he had whenever delivering unsettling news. He admitted that he didn't know. The medical literature was limited. Some patients experienced these episodes throughout their lives without serious harm. Others, he paused, had been buried alive. The words lingered in the room like a curse. From that moment on, the Wells family lived with a constant, gnawing fear. Eliza's episodes became more frequent as she grew older, sometimes occurring once a month, other times several times a week. Each time, her parents could do nothing but watch as her body stiffened, her eyes rolled back, and her breathing became so faint that a mirror held to her lips barely fogged. Yet between these episodes, Eliza was full of life. She was curious, sharp-tongued, and resilient, with a wit that occasionally landed her in trouble. She inherited her mother's delicate features and her father's stubborn determination. By 16, Eliza had grown into a striking young woman with deep brown skin, expressive dark eyes, and hair worn in elaborate braids that Catherine had taught her style. Despite the harsh restrictions placed on free black people in Charleston, they could not testify against white citizens, could not gather in groups larger than 7, and were required to carry proof of their freedom at all times. Eliza refused to shrink herself. She worked alongside her father in his workshop, learning to carve and sand wood with meticulous precision. She assisted her mother with sewing, producing stitches so fine they were nearly invisible. And she read constantly, borrowing books from Dr. Howell's personal collection whenever she could. It was Dr. Howell who introduced Eliza to Samuel Pritchard, a young man employed as a clerk in a shipping office. Samuel was also free, his family having been granted their liberty 3 generations earlier. He was tall, serious, and careful in his manners, with dreams of one day owning his own business. He had first noticed Eliza at church, at the African Methodist Episcopal Church on Calhoun Street, where free black citizens and enslaved people with their owners' permission gathered to worship. Samuel began courting Eliza properly with her parents' permission, visiting on Sunday afternoons and walking with her through the small park where people of color were allowed to gather. Samuel knew about Eliza's condition. Everyone in their close-knit community did, but it did not discourage him. One warm afternoon in April of 1848, as they sat together on a bench beneath a sprawling live oak draped in swaying Spanish moss, he told her about his grandmother. She had suffered from what people once called the falling sickness, he explained, and she had lived to be 73 years old. An affliction does not define a person, he said gently. Eliza smiled, deeply moved. Most men would run, she replied. Most men are fools, Samuel said, and for the first time, he reached out and took her hand. That simple touch, that quiet moment of hope and normalcy, would become one of the last peaceful memories before everything unraveled. The first death came on a Tuesday in late May. The day began like any other. Eliza rose early, as she always did, and helped her mother prepare breakfast. There were hominy grits with butter and coffee brewed from chicory root. Marcus had already left for his workshop, where he was completing an ornate dining table for Milton family, one of Charleston's oldest and most influential households. The heat set in early, the kind that clung to the skin and turned even the smallest task into an exhausting effort. Eliza spent the morning assisting her mother with laundry, hauling water from the cistern, and scrubbing clothes against the washboard until her hands burned. By midday, she complained of a pounding headache. Catherine wiped the sweat from her brow and told her daughter to lie down, remarking that the heat was ungodly. Eliza retreated to her small room at the back of the house. It was sparsely furnished, a narrow bed topped with a quilt Catherine had sewn by hand, a modest dresser, a single chair, and a shelf holding her treasured books. She lay down on top of the covers without changing her clothes and closed her eyes. 2 hours later, Catherine went to check on her, carrying a cup of cool water. The moment she stepped into the room, She knew something was wrong. Eliza lay completely motionless. Her body was stiff, her eyes partially open and fixed on nothing. Her skin had taken on a dull, grayish pallor, and when Catherine touched her hand, it was cold. "Eliza," Catherine called, panic sharpening her voice. "Eliza, baby, wake up." There was no movement, no response. Catherine pressed her ear to her daughter's chest, straining to hear a heartbeat. She heard nothing. She held her hand beneath Eliza's nose and mouth, searching for the faintest breath. There was none. The scream that tore from Catherine's throat brought neighbors rushing into the house. Within minutes, the small home was crowded. Women from the neighborhood, old Mr. Foster from next door, and Reverend Thomas from their church, who happened to be nearby, all gathered in stunned silence. One by one, they reached the same conclusion. Eliza Wells was dead. Someone ran to fetch Marcus from his workshop. He arrived breathless, sawdust still clinging to his clothing, and forced his way through the crowd to his daughter's room. When he saw Eliza lying there, cold and unmoving, something inside him shattered. He lifted her rigid body into his arms and wept. The sound that came from him raw and unforgettable, a deep animal cry of grief that those present will remember for the rest of their lives. It sounded as though it rose from the very depths of the earth. Dr. Howell was summoned at once. He arrived within the hour, his medical bag in hand, his expression somber. He examined Eliza carefully, checking for a pulse at her wrist, her neck, and her ankle. He listened to her chest with his stethoscope. He held a candle flame near her eyes to see if her pupils would react. He pricked her finger with a needle, watching for even the slightest flinch. There was nothing, no response to any stimulus. At last, Dr. Howell straightened and removed the spectacles, his hands trembling faintly. He said quietly that he was deeply sorry. She was gone. Catherine collapsed. Marcus stood rigid, unable to comprehend the words. Around them, neighbors began the familiar rituals of mourning. Mirrors were covered. The clock in Eliza's room was stopped at 2:47 p.m., the moment Dr. Howell officially pronounced her dead. But before leaving, Dr. Howell drew Marcus aside. In a low voice, he told him there was something important he needed to say. Given Eliza's history of cataleptic episodes, he wanted to be absolutely certain. He would note in his records that she was not to be buried for at least 48 hours. He wanted time to observe her condition and be completely sure. Marcus nodded numbly and asked if the doctor thought she might still be alive. Dr. Howell replied only that caution was necessary. Word spread quickly through Charleston's free black community. By evening, visitors arrived steadily to pay their respects. Samuel Pritchard came and sat beside Eliza's body for hours, holding her cold hand as silent tears streamed down his face. Women from the church brought food. Men offered to help Marcus build a coffin. Eliza's body was laid out in the front room, dressed in her finest dress, a simple yet elegant blue cotton gown Catherine had sewn herself. Her hands were folded neatly over her chest. Candles were placed around her, their flames flickering softly. People came and went, praying, singing hymns, and sharing memories of the bright young woman taken far too soon. Dr. Howell returned 3 times that first day. Each visit, he examined Eliza closely. Each time, he found no sign of life. Her body remained stiff and cold, entirely unresponsive. The gray pallor of her skin deepened. By the second day, a faint odor of decay began to seep into the room. That evening, Dr. Howell admitted to Marcus that he had been wrong to hope. Whatever doubts he once had were gone. Eliza was truly dead. Marcus began building the coffin that night, working alone by lamplight in his workshop. It was the most painful task of his life. Every plain board, every carefully fitted joint felt like a betrayal. He crafted it from cherry wood and fitted it with brass handles, making it as beautiful as his hands allowed. It was the last thing he could give his daughter. The funeral was set for Thursday morning, 3 days after Eliza's death. The service would take place at the African Methodist Episcopal Church, followed by burial in the small cemetery behind it. where free people of color were permitted to lay their loved ones to rest. On Wednesday evening, the night before the funeral, Catherine insisted on sitting alone with her daughter one final time. By then, the house had finally emptied of people, visitors. Marcus had gone to the church to finalize the remaining arrangements. Catherine remained behind, seated in a chair beside the table where Eliza's body rested. She held her daughter's cold hand and prayed. She prayed for hours, her voice hoarse from crying, pleading with God for a miracle she believed would never come. She recited every prayer she knew, every psalm, every hymn she could remember. She spoke to Eliza softly, telling her stories from her childhood, recalling happier days, and asking forgiveness for every sharp word she had ever spoken in moments of frustration. Near midnight, exhaustion finally overtook her grief. Catherine's head slowly drooped forward, and she drifted into a light sleep, still holding Eliza's hand. She awoke to the sound of gasping. At first, disoriented in the dim room where the candles had burned low, she thought she must be dreaming. Then she heard it again, a harsh, desperate gulp of air. Catherine lifted her head and looked at her daughter. Eliza's chest was moving, rising and falling rapidly, as though she had been submerged in water and had only just broken the surface. Her eyes, which had been half open and glassy for 3 days, suddenly focused. Her fingers, which had been stiff and cold, twitched inside Catherine's grasp. "Mama," Eliza whispered, her voice dry and cracked. Catherine screamed. It was not a scream of fear, but of such overwhelming shock that it bypassed reason entirely. She leapt to her feet and stumbled backward, her mind unable to reconcile what she was seeing. Eliza was slowly sitting up, her movements stiff, awkward and uncoordinated, but she was moving. She was breathing. She was alive. "Mama, what's wrong?" Eliza asked weakly, confusion and fear filling her voice. "Why are you screaming? Why am I?" She looked down at the dress she was wearing, at the candles surrounding her. "Why am I in the front room? What happened?" Catherine could not speak. She could not move. Her mind simply refused to process what was happening. At that moment, the front door burst open. Marcus had heard Catherine scream from down the street and had run back to the house, fearing fire or an intruder. He froze in the doorway, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Eliza," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Papa," Eliza replied, turning toward him. The movement seemed to cause her pain. She winced and pressed a hand to her chest. "Papa, what's happening? Why does everyone look so scared? Why do I feel so strange?" Marcus was the first to move. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled Eliza into his arms, holding her so tightly that she gasped for breath. His entire body shook. When Catherine finally found the strength to move, she rushed them, and the 3 of them clung to one another, crying. Whether those tears came from joy, terror, or sheer disbelief, none of them could have said. The noise drew the neighbors. Mrs. Foster from next door was the first to enter. When she saw Eliza alive, moving and speaking, she fainted on the spot. Others crowded in behind her, and the small house erupted into chaos. Some people screamed. Some dropped to their knees and prayed. Others fled in panic, convinced they were witnessing a ghost or something demonic. Someone had the presence of mind to send for Dr. Howell. He arrived at a run, his shirt only half buttoned, his medical bag clenched in his hand. He pushed through the gathering crowd and stopped short, staring at Eliza with an expression of pure disbelief. He whispered that this was impossible. But Eliza was undeniably there, alive, sitting on the edge of the table and looking around at the confusion with growing distress. "Dr. Howell, please," she said, her voice strengthening as she spoke. "Please tell me what's happening. Why is everyone acting this way? What's wrong with me?" Dr. Howell approached her slowly, as though afraid she might vanish if he moved too quickly. He took her wrist and felt for her pulse. It was rapid but strong and steady. He listened to her heart. It was beating. He examined her eyes, watching her pupils contract when he raised a candle. "Eliza," he said carefully, "what is the last thing you remember?" She frowned as she thought. She remembered having a headache. She remembered her mother telling her to lie down. She remembered going to her room. After that, there was nothing. She said it was as if she had fallen asleep, but the dreams had been dark. She could not move or speak, but she could hear voices, crying. She heard her mother, her father, and Samuel. She tried to tell them she was all right, but her body would not obey. It felt like being trapped inside herself. She looked up at Dr. Howell, fear widening her eyes, and asked how long she had been asleep. "Eliza," Dr. Howell said gently, "you weren't asleep. You were dead. You've been dead for 3 days." The room fell into absolute silence. Eliza stared at him, shaking her head. Dr. Howell explained that he had examined her multiple times. There had been no heartbeat, no breath, no response of any kind. Her body had been cold and rigid. There were even early signs of decay. He had pronounced her dead and signed the death certificate. Her funeral was scheduled for the following morning. Eliza looked around at the candles, at the dress she was wearing, at the faces of neighbors staring back at her in awe and terror. She looked at her parents and saw the truth reflected in their tear-streaked faces. "I died," she said quietly, her voice small and almost childlike. "You did," Dr. Howell confirmed. "And somehow, against all reason, you came back." The news spread through Charleston like wildfire. By dawn, a crowd had gathered outside the Wells house. Free black citizens, enslaved people who had slipped away from their owners, and even white townsfolk drawn by the impossible story all came to see the girl who had died and returned to life. Some came out of curiosity. Others came out of faith, believing they were witnessing a miracle. And some came out of fear, convinced something unnatural had taken place. Dr. Howell spent the entire night examining Eliza, carefully recording every detail. He measured her pulse, her temperature, and her breathing. He tested her reflexes, her memory, and her physical strength. Aside from stiffness in her muscles and lingering weakness, she appeared to be in good health. More than that, she seemed entirely normal, as though the past. 3 days had been nothing more than a deep sleep. As the sun rose, Dr. Howell spoke quietly to Marcus, saying he needed to write to his colleagues. What had happened was unprecedented. The medical journals needed to know. This could change everything they understood about death, about catalepsy, about the boundary between life and death itself. Marcus's response was immediate and unyielding. There would be no journals, no letters, no publicity of any kind. Dr. Howell stared at him in disbelief. He insisted this was a medical miracle, something the scientific community needed to examine. Marcus interrupted him sharply. The scientific community, he said, would treat Eliza like an animal in a menagerie. They would poke and prod her, parade her as a curiosity. Worse still, he lowered his voice. There were people in Charleston who would say she was possessed, that she was a demon or a witch. He reminded Dr. Howell that he knew how people thought, and what fear could drive them to do. Dr. Howell fell silent, because he did know. He had seen how superstition and terror could turn dangerous, especially in a city where most black people were enslaved, and even free people of color lived under constant suspicion and control. Marcus told him they would say it was a mistake. They would claim Eliza had been in an extraordinarily deep cataleptic state, one so severe it mimicked death, but that she had never truly died. They would say the funeral preparations had begun too quickly, and that the blame lay with them. Then they would move on. Dr. Howell protested. He had examined her multiple times. Clinically, medically, she had been dead. He said he would stake his reputation on it. Marcus replied quietly that he should not stake his reputation, but Eliza's life. If people believed she had truly died and returned, they would not see a miracle. They would see something to fear, and fear made people dangerous. Dr. Howell wanted to argue, but he could not. He knew Marcus was right. Together, they constructed a safer version of the truth. Dr. Howell wrote a revised report stating that he had made an error in his initial examination, that Eliza had been in an extreme cataleptic state that had so closely resembled death it deceived even a trained physician. He noted that while rare, the condition was known in medical literature and that her recovery, though remarkable, was not supernatural. But the damage was already done. The story had spread too far and too fast. Within days, people from all over Charleston came to see the young woman who had died and returned. Some brought sick relatives, begging Eliza to touch them, convinced she had been granted healing powers. Others came to condemn her, shouting scripture about witchcraft and demons. The Wells family tried to preserve some sense of normal life. Marcus returned to his workshop. Catherine took up her sewing again. Eliza attempted to help with chores, but nothing felt normal anymore. People stared at her in the streets. Children ran from her. Former friends crossed the opposite side of the road to avoid her. Samuel Pritchard was one of the few who never wavered. He visited every day, sitting with Eliza in the small parlor and speaking about ordinary things. The weather, ships in the harbor, dreams of the future. He treated her exactly as he always had, and for that, Eliza was deeply grateful. One afternoon in June, as they sat together on the piazza with the heat shimmering in the air, Eliza asked him quietly if he thought she was cursed. Samuel answered without hesitation. He said she had a medical condition that people did not yet understand, nothing more. She told him people thought she was a demon, that even the Reverend would no longer allow her to attend church, claiming her presence unsettled the congregation. Samuel's jaw tightened. Then the Reverend was a fool, he said. Eliza smiled faintly and told him he was very kind. Samuel took her hand and told her he was not being kind, only honest. She was the same person she had always been. Nothing had changed, even as they both knew that everything had. For 6 weeks, life slowly returned to something resembling normal. The crowds outside the Wells house faded away. The gossip never disappeared entirely, but it softened. Eliza's strength returned, and her cataleptic episodes, surprisingly, became less frequent. Dr. Howell speculated that the prolonged episode might have somehow reset her nervous system, though he admitted it was only a theory. Marcus received a major commission, a full set of bedroom furniture for a wealthy planter from Beaufort, work that would support the family for months. Catherine's embroidery business, which had suffered during the scandal, began to recover as her regular clients quietly returned. Samuel formally asked Marcus for permission to marry Eliza. After a long conversation with his daughter, Marcus gave his blessing. They planned a small, quiet wedding for fall, once the worst of the summer heat had passed. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the nightmare was finally ending. Then, on a humid afternoon in early July, Eliza died again. She was at the market with her mother, buying vegetables for dinner. The place was crowded and loud, the air heavy with the smell of fish, produce, and unwashed bodies. Eliza had felt fine, weary from the heat, but otherwise well. She was inspecting a basket of tomatoes when her body suddenly went rigid. Catherine saw it happen. She saw her daughter's eyes roll back, saw her body lock and begin to fall. Catherine caught her before she hit the ground, screaming for help. This episode was different. Eliza did not merely stiffen. Her skin turned gray within seconds. Her lips darkened with a bluish tint. When Catherine pressed her ear to Eliza's chest, she heard nothing. No heartbeat, no breath. Catherine whispered no, over and over, begging God not to let it happen again. People crowded around, some attempting to help, others staring in horrified fascination. Someone ran for Dr. Howell. Someone else ran to find Marcus. The market dissolved into chaos as vendors abandoned their stalls and customers surged forward to see. Dr. Howell arrived quickly, his office only a few blocks away. He forced his way through the crowd and knelt beside Eliza's body. He examined her swiftly and methodically, his movements practiced and precise, his face already darkening with a fear he could not yet bring himself to name, his face growing more grim with every passing second. There was no pulse, no breath, no reaction to any stimulus. Dr. Howell looked up at Catherine, and the expression on his face told her everything before he spoke. Catherine shook her head violently, her voice rising into desperation. She said no, he was wrong. He had been wrong before. Eliza would wake up again, just like she had last time. She clutched her daughter's body, screaming that Eliza always woke up. Marcus arrived moments later and had to physically pull his wife away so Dr. Howell could continue. But there was nothing left to examine. Eliza Wells was dead again. This time, the reaction around them was different. This time, the crowd was not only shocked or grieving. They were afraid. Whispers spread quickly. Someone muttered that it was unnatural. Another voice said she was cursed. Someone else claimed she should never have returned the first time, that this second death was God's judgment. Dr. Howell ordered Eliza's body taken back to the Wells house. There, he examined her more thoroughly than ever before, documenting every detail. He searched for poison, for signs of violence, for any possible explanation. He found nothing. Just as before, Eliza had simply stopped. This time, Dr. Howell was determined to be absolutely certain before pronouncing her dead. He had already claimed to have been mistaken once in his revised report. He would not allow that to happen again. He stayed with the body for 12 straight hours, checking for signs of life every 30 minutes. He used every test he knew. He pricked her skin with needles, held flames near her flesh, shouted in her ear, pressed firmly on her chest. There was nothing, no movement, no response. By midnight, he was forced to accept the truth. Eliza Wells was dead for the second time. He signed the death certificate with a trembling hand. The funeral was scheduled for Saturday, 2 days later. This time, there would be no delays and no waiting period. The body would be buried quickly, before anything else could happen. But the city was in an uproar. The story of Eliza Wells, the girl who had died, returned to life, and then died again, spread far beyond Charleston's free black community. It was discussed in white parlors, in churches, and in taverns. Newspapers picked it up, printing sensational accounts that bore little resemblance to reality. Some called it a miracle. Others called it witchcraft. Religious leaders argued over whether Eliza had been resurrected by God or reanimated by the devil. Medical men debated catalepsy, suspended animation, and the very definition of death itself. The controversy grew so intense that the mayor's office issued a public statement urging calm and dismissing the entire affair as a medical curiosity exaggerated by superstition. For Marcus and Catherine Wells, none of that mattered. There was no debate, no controversy. There was only grief. A grief made infinitely worse by the fact that they had already mourned their daughter once, had already experienced the impossible joy of her return, and now were forced to face her loss again. Samuel Pritchard was devastated. He stayed with Eliza's body through the night before the funeral, speaking to her as though she could still hear him. He begged her to come back again. He promised he would protect her, that he did not care what anyone said or believed. But Eliza did not wake. Friday passed. Her body remained cold, rigid, and unresponsive. The smell of decay slowly filled the house. Dr. Howell visited several times, and each time he confirmed there was no change, no sign of life. Saturday morning arrived. The funeral was set for 10 o'clock. The church was filled not only with those who had known Eliza, but with onlookers drawn by curiosity. People who wanted to witness the burial of the girl who defied death once and might do so again. Despite his earlier reluctance, the Reverend agreed to conduct the service, though his sermon emphasized submission to God's will and warned against questioning the mysteries of life and death. The coffin, the same finely crafted cherrywood box Marcus had built weeks earlier, was carried to the cemetery by 6 men from the community. Marcus insisted on being one of them, even though his legs trembled so badly he could barely walk. The grave had been dug beneath a magnolia tree at the edge of the cemetery, a quiet, shaded place Catherine herself had chosen. The coffin was lowered into the earth. Final prayers were spoken. People stepped forward one by one, dropping flowers into the grave and whispering their farewells. Then a sound came from inside the coffin. A dull thump, muted but unmistakable. The crowd froze. Another thump followed, then another, and then, clear and desperate, a voice cried out, begging to be let out, saying she could not breathe. For a moment, no one moved. The sheer impossibility of what they were hearing left everyone paralyzed. Then Samuel Pritchard broke from the crowd and leapt into the grave. He landed hard on the coffin and began clawing at the lid, screaming for tools, for help, for anyone to do something. Marcus and 2 other men jumped down after him. Someone ran for a crowbar. The crowd surged forward, people shouting, praying, crying, and backing away in terror. The coffin lid was forced open. Eliza was inside, alive. Her eyes were wide with terror. Her hands were bloodied from pounding against the wood. She was gasping for air, her chest heaving, her face streaked with tears. Samuel pulled her free and lifted her from the grave. She collapsed in his arms, sobbing uncontrollably, shaking so violently she could not speak. The crowd erupted. Some screamed, some fainted, others fled in panic. Some dropped to their knees, convinced they were witnessing a miracle, a curse, or the end of the world itself. Dr. Howell pushed through the chaos and examined Eliza right there in the cemetery. She was alive, undeniably, impossibly alive. Her heart was beating. She was breathing. She was conscious and aware. How long? Eliza gasped, clutching Samuel. How long was I in there? 2 days, Dr. Howell said, his voice unsteady. You've been dead for 2 days. Eliza began, his face growing more severe with every passing second. No pulse, no breath, no reaction to pain or sound. He finally lifted his eyes to Catherine, and she knew the truth before he spoke. No, Catherine said sharply, her voice climbing toward panic. No, you're wrong. You were wrong before. She'll wake up. She always wakes up. She woke up last time. Her words dissolved into screams as she clutched Eliza's limp body, rocking back and forth. She'll wake up. She always wakes up. Marcus arrived moments later and had to physically pull his wife away, so Dr. Howell could continue. But there was nothing left to examine. Eliza Wells was dead again. And this time, the reaction was different. This time, it wasn't only grief. Fear spread through the room like a sickness. Anger followed close behind. Suspicion whispered from every corner. This isn't natural, someone muttered from the crowd. She's cursed, another voice said. She never should have come back the first time, someone else added. This is God's judgment. Dr. Howell ordered Eliza's body returned to the Wells house. There, he conducted a far more exhaustive examination than before, recording every detail with trembling precision. He searched for poison, for hidden wounds, for any sign of violence or illness. He found nothing. Just as before, Eliza had simply stopped. This time, however, Dr. Howell refused to make the same mistake. He was determined to be absolutely certain before declaring her dead. He stayed with the body for 12 straight hours, checking for signs of life every 30 minutes. He used every test he knew. He pricked her skin with needles, passed flames close enough to burn, shouted directly into her ear, pressed firmly on her chest. There was no reaction, no movement, no breath. By midnight, he could deny it no longer. Eliza Wells was dead for the second time. His hand shook as he signed the death certificate. The funeral was scheduled for 2 days later, on Saturday. There would be no delays this time. No waiting. The body would be buried quickly, before anything else could happen. But the city was already in turmoil. The story of Eliza Wells, the girl who had died, returned to life, and then died again, spread far beyond Charleston's free black community. It was discussed in white parlors, in churches, in taverns. Newspapers seized on it, publishing sensational accounts that barely resembled reality. Some called it a miracle, others labeled it witchcraft. Religious leaders argued fiercely over whether Eliza had been raised by God or reanimated by the devil. Physicians debated catalepsy, suspended animation, and the very definition of death. The controversy grew so intense that the mayor's office issued a statement urging calm and dismissing the affair as nothing more than a medical curiosity exaggerated by superstition. For Marcus and Catherine Wells, none of that mattered. There was no debate for them, only grief. A grief made unbearable by the fact that they had already buried their daughter once, had already experienced the impossible joy of her return, only to lose her all over again. Samuel Pritchard was shattered. He stayed beside Eliza's body through the night before the funeral, speaking to her softly as though she could hear him. He begged her to wake up again. He promised he would protect her, that he didn't care what anyone said or believed, that he would stand by her no matter what. But Eliza did not wake. Friday passed. Her body remained cold, rigid, unmoving. The first faint smell of decay crept through the house. Dr. Howell came several times, and each visit ended the same way. No change, no signs of life. Saturday morning came. The funeral was set for 10 o'clock. The church was packed, not only with those who loved Eliza, but with strangers driven by curiosity. People who wanted to witness the burial of the girl who had defied death once and might do so again. The Reverend, despite his earlier hesitation, agreed to perform the service. His sermon focused heavily on accepting God's will and not questioning the mysteries of life and death. The coffin, the same polished cherrywood coffin Marcus had built weeks earlier, was carried to the cemetery by 6 men from the community. Marcus insisted on being one of them, though his legs trembled so violently he could barely walk. The grave lay beneath a magnolia tree in a quiet, shaded corner of the cemetery. Catherine had chosen the spot herself. The coffin was lowered into the earth. Final prayers were spoken. One by one, mourners stepped forward to drop flowers into the grave and whisper their goodbyes. Then it happened. From inside the coffin came a sound, a dull thump, muffled but unmistakable. The crowd froze. Another thump, then another, and then, clear and desperate, a voice. "Let me out, please. I can't breathe. Let me out." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The sheer impossibility of what they were hearing left them paralyzed. Then Samuel Pritchard broke from the crowd and leapt into the grave. He landed hard on the coffin and clawed at the lid, screaming for tools, for help, for anyone to do something. Marcus and 2 other men jumped in beside him. Someone ran for a crowbar. The crowd surged forward, voices rising. Prayers, sobs, shouts of terror. The lid was forced open. Eliza was inside, alive. Her eyes were wide with terror. Her hands were raw and bleeding from pounding on the wood. She gasped desperately for air, her chest heaving, her face streaked with tears. Samuel pulled her free and lifted her from the grave. She collapsed against him, shaking uncontrollably, unable to speak. The crowd erupted. People screamed. Some fainted. Others ran. Some fell to their knees, convinced they were witnessing a miracle, a curse, or the end of the world. Dr. Howell pushed through the chaos and examined Eliza right there among the open graves. She was alive. Undeniably, impossibly alive. Her heart was beating. She was breathing. She was conscious. "How long?" she gasped, clinging to Samuel. "How long was I in there?" 2 days, Dr. Howell said, his voice unsteady. "You've been dead for 2 days." Eliza screamed. Just when Charleston thought it had seen the worst, the horror deepened. If this story sends chills down your spine, share it with someone who loves dark mysteries. Tap that like button to support the channel, and subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Now, let's uncover what happened next. The aftermath of Eliza's second return was catastrophic. The story exploded beyond Charleston, spreading across South Carolina and into neighboring states. Newspapers as far away as New York and Boston published the tale. Some treated it as a medical anomaly. Others hailed it as divine intervention. Still others warned it was proof of demonic possession. The Wells home was overwhelmed. Crowds gathered day and night, demanding to see Eliza, to touch her, to hear her speak. Some brought sick relatives, convinced she could heal them. Others arrived carrying Bibles and crosses, convinced she needed to be cleansed or cast out. Authorities were forced to post guards to keep order. Religious leaders were deeply divided. Some proclaimed Eliza a miracle, undeniable proof of God's power over death. Others denounced her as an abomination, a violation of nature that should not exist. Calls were made for church examinations, for tests to determine whether she was holy or unholy. Doctors from across the country wrote to Dr. Howell, demanding details, questioning his skill, offering theories. Some claimed Eliza had never truly died, and that Howell was simply incompetent. Others suggested she suffered from a rare condition, allowing her to enter deep suspended animation. A few accused the Wells family of fraud, calling the entire affair an elaborate hoax. Dr. Howell knew better. He had examined Eliza both times. He had found no heartbeat, no breath, no signs of life. He had watched her body for hours and performed every test available to him. She had been clinically, medically, undeniably dead. And then she had returned. He wrote a detailed report documenting both incidents and submitted it to the Charleston Medical Journal. It was rejected. The editor replied that while Dr. Howell's reputation was respected, the claims were too extraordinary to be believed and would damage the journal's credibility. Howell sent the report to other publications. Everyone rejected it, some politely, others with thinly veiled accusations of incompetence or deceit. Desperate for understanding, Dr. Howell began searching for similar cases. He wrote to colleagues in Europe and scoured medical libraries. What he found disturbed him. There were other cases, rare but real, of people pronounced dead, prepared for burial, and then revived. Many of these cases ended tragically, with a revived person accused of witchcraft, executed, or shunned until they died alone. Some physicians had attempted to explain the phenomenon. They called it apparent death, a condition so convincing that even trained doctors could be deceived. Causes varied: catalepsy, certain toxins, extreme cold, severe trauma. In some instances, people remained in this state for days before reviving. Dr. Howell became convinced this explained Eliza's condition, a profound cataleptic state combined with some unknown factor. Heat, stress, or something unique in her physiology may have pushed her beyond anything he had seen before. Yet it still failed to explain why it happened twice, or why she showed signs of decay. The gray skin, the smell, the coldness, before returning. He had no answers, only questions that haunted his nights. For Eliza, the ordeal was beyond traumatic. She remembered the darkness, the paralysis, the horror of being trapped inside her own body, fully aware but unable to move or speak. She remembered hearing voices, her parents crying, Samuel pleading, Dr. Howell declaring her dead. She remembered trying to scream and failing. And she remembered the coffin, the absolute blackness, the smell of wood and cloth, the realization that she was buried alive, the panic, the frantic pounding, the screams until her throat burned raw, the certainty that she would die there, suffocating in the dark. Nightmares plagued her every night. She woke screaming, convinced the coffin was closing around her again. Samuel, who had moved into the Wells home to care for her, held her through the terror, whispering that she was safe, that she was alive, that he would never leave her. But Eliza did not feel safe. She felt as though she was living on borrowed time, as if death itself were waiting patiently for another chance. What if it happens again? She asked Dr. Howell during one of his visits. What if I die again and no one hears me? What if they bury me and I wake up alone in the dark? Dr. Howell had no comfort to give. He feared the same thing. He proposed a solution, a safety coffin. Used in Europe, he explained, designed with bell or flag connected to a string inside the coffin. If the person awakened, they could pull the string and alert those above ground. Marcus was horrified. You're talking about preparing for her to die again. I'm talking about preparing for possibility, Dr. Howell said quietly. Given her history, We have to assume it could happen. If it does, we must make sure she can call for help. It was a grim discussion, but an unavoidable one. In the end, Marcus agreed to construct a modified coffin fitted with a bell and cord system. It stood in his workshop afterward, unfinished yet unmistakable, a silent reminder of the nightmare they had survived and feared might return. But the weeks passed and nothing happened. Eliza remained healthy. The cataleptic episodes that had once plagued her vanished entirely. Her strength returned, color warming her skin, vitality filling her voice and movements. Slowly, cautiously, hope crept back in. She began to believe that perhaps the worst was behind her, that whatever dark force or fragile condition had claimed her twice had finally released its hold. Samuel proposed again. This time, Eliza accepted without hesitation. They were married quietly in the Wells home, surrounded only by family and a few trusted friends. No church would agree to host the ceremony. Eliza was still too controversial, too unsettling, a reminder of mysteries people preferred not to confront. But none of that mattered to them. They were happy. They moved into a small house Samuel had been saving to buy, just a few streets from her parents. Samuel's employer, impressed by his reliability and devotion, promoted him to a position with greater responsibility and better wages. Eliza helped him with bookkeeping and correspondence, her sharp intellect and education making her an invaluable partner. For nearly a year, life was good. Eliza and Samuel spoke often of starting a family. Marcus's furniture business flourished. Catherine's embroidery became highly sought after. The scandal that had once consumed Charleston slowly faded, replaced by new rumors, new tragedies, new distractions. Dr. Howell published a carefully worded paper in a small medical journal, avoiding sensational language while discussing catalepsy and apparent death. He never mentioned Eliza by name, but those familiar with the story recognized the case immediately. The paper attracted little attention from the broader medical community, though a handful of physicians wrote to him with curiosity, forming a modest correspondence network. Normalcy, fragile as it was, seemed to return. Then, in the spring of 1850, Eliza became pregnant. The pregnancy was difficult from the beginning. She suffered relentless nausea, crushing fatigue, and frequent dizzy spells. Dr. Howell watched her closely, deeply concerned that the strain on her body might trigger another episode. But the weeks passed and the months, and although Eliza was often miserable, she remained stable. Samuel was overjoyed at the thought of becoming a father. He hovered over Eliza, bringing her whatever she craved, reading aloud to her in the evenings, massaging her swollen feet. Marcus built a cradle from rich walnut wood, carving delicate flowers and birds into its sides. Catherine sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her stitches as flawless as ever. The baby was due in late September. As summer gave way to fall, Eliza grew heavier and more uncomfortable, but also more excited. She spoke constantly about the child, about names, about dreams, about the kind of mother she wanted to be. The fear that had once dominated her life seemed to loosen its grip, replaced by anticipation and fragile joy. On September 23rd, 1850, Eliza went into labor. It was long and punishing. Dr. Howell attended, assisted by an experienced midwife named Mrs. Patterson. The labor stretched through the night and into the following day. Eliza was exhausted and in agony, but she refused to surrender. Late in the afternoon, the baby was finally born. A girl, small but healthy, with strong lungs she used immediately to announce her arrival. Eliza held her daughter for the first time, tears pouring down her face, overwhelmed by a joy so intense it almost hurt. Samuel stood beside her, one hand resting on her shoulder, staring at the tiny life they had created. "What should we name her?" he asked softly. Eliza looked down at the perfect little face in her arms. "Grace," she said. "Her name is Grace." For 2 hours, everything was perfect. Eliza nursed the baby. Samuel held her. Marcus and Catherine came in to meet their granddaughter. Dr. Howell examined both mother and child and declared them healthy. Then Eliza frowned. "I'm dizzy," she said, her words slurring slightly. I feel... Her eyes rolled back. Her body stiffened. The baby, still in her arms, began to slip. Samuel caught Grace just before she fell. Dr. Howell rushed to Eliza's side, already knowing what he'd find. No pulse, no breath, no response. Eliza Wells was dead, for the third time. But this time, Dr. Howell was ready. He did not pronounce her dead. He did not allow anyone to prepare her body. He did not let despair take control. "Get her to the bed," he ordered, "and someone fetch my full medical kit from my office. Now." For the next 48 hours, Dr. Howell never left her side. He brought new instruments, a refined stethoscope, a more sensitive thermometer, a device capable of detecting the faintest breath. Every 30 minutes, he examined her and recorded his observations. Her body showed every sign of death: the gray pallor, the unnatural cold, the stiffness, the complete absence of detectable heartbeat or respiration. Still, Dr. Howell refused to give up. He had seen this before, twice. He believed she would return again. Marcus and Catherine remained with him, keeping vigil. Samuel paced the house endlessly, holding baby Grace, torn apart by grief for his wife and fierce love for his daughter. The house was unervingly quiet, broken only by the baby's occasional cries and the steady ticking of the clock. 24 hours passed. No change. 36 hours. Still nothing. 48 hours. Silence. Dr. Howell's confidence began to falter. Eliza had never remained in this state longer than 2 days. If she was going to wake, she should have done so by now. "Maybe this time is different," Catherine whispered. "Maybe this time she's really gone." Dr. Howell said nothing. He had no answer. 50 hours. 52. 54. Then, at 56 hours after her collapse, Eliza gasped. It was faint, barely audible, but Dr. Howell heard it. He pressed the stethoscope to her chest and detected a weak, irregular flutter, a heartbeat struggling back to life. Her chest began to rise and fall, shallow breaths at first, then deeper ones. Her eyes opened. "Grace," she whispered. It was the first word she spoke. "Where's Grace? Is she all right?" Samuel rushed into the room, the baby cradled in his arms. "She's here. She's perfect. She's right here." Eliza reached for her daughter with trembling hands. Samuel gently placed Grace into her arms, and Eliza drew her close, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. "I heard her crying," Eliza whispered, "while I was wherever I was. I heard her crying, and I knew I had come back. I couldn't leave her. I couldn't leave you." Dr. Howell examined her carefully and repeatedly. Aside from profound weakness and exhaustion, she appeared well. Her heartbeat was strong and regular. Her breathing was steady. Her mind was clear, and she fully understood what had happened. For the third time, Eliza Wells had returned from death. This time, there were no announcements, no interrupted funerals, no crowds or rumors. Dr. Howell, Marcus, Catherine, and Samuel agreed that what had happened would remain private. They had learned what public attention could do. Dr. Howell wrote a complete and meticulous account of all 3 incidents, but he locked it away in his private files and never submitted it for publication. He continued studying catalepsy and apparent death, corresponding quietly with physicians in Europe, but he never again spoke Eliza's name in any public setting. Eliza's recovery was slow. Childbirth and her third death had left her fragile for weeks, but gradually her strength returned. She poured herself into caring for Grace, and in motherhood she found a sense of purpose and grounding that helped her survive the memories of what she had endured. The cataleptic episodes never came back. Whatever had caused them, whatever force or flaw had led to those 3 terrible deaths and impossible returns, seemed to have passed. Dr. Howell speculated that pregnancy and childbirth may have altered Eliza's physiology in some permanent way, effectively curing her condition. but remained only a theory. He had no proof and no real explanation. Eliza and Samuel lived quietly, deliberately avoiding attention, focused on raising their daughter. Grace grew into a healthy, intelligent child, unaware of the strange history surrounding her mother. When they eventually told her, once she was old enough to understand, it sounded like a distant story from another life. Marcus continued his furniture business until his death in 1867. Catherine lived until 1872, long enough to meet her great-grandchildren. Samuel became a successful businessman and eventually owned his own shipping office. Eliza lived to the age of 63, passing away peacefully in her sleep in 1895, a death that was by all accounts entirely ordinary and final. Dr. Nathaniel Howell kept his detailed records of Eliza's case until his own death in 1881. His papers were donated to the Charleston Medical Society, where they sat archived and largely forgotten for decades. It was not until 1923 that a medical historian researching the history of catalepsy uncovered Dr. Howell's files. The detailed documentation of Eliza Wells' 3 deaths and resurrections was published in a medical journal, causing a brief stir in the medical world. By then, however, everyone involved was long gone, and the case remained a curiosity, discussed, debated, but never fully explained. Modern medicine offers theories: catalepsy, locked-in syndrome, extreme bradycardia, conditions capable of mimicking death so convincingly that even trained physicians can be fooled. But none fully explain what happened to Eliza Wells. None explain the visible signs of decay followed by recovery. None explain how she survived buried in a coffin for hours before rescue. The truth is, we don't know. We may never know. What we do know is this: Eliza Wells died 3 times within the span of 2 years. 3 times she was pronounced dead by a physician. 3 times her body displayed every sign of death. And 3 times, against all reason, she came back. Was a medical phenomenon not yet understood? Something unique to Eliza's body? Or something else entirely? Something beyond rational explanation? The records exist. Dr. Howell's detailed notes, witnessed and corroborated by dozens of people. The signed death certificates. The newspaper reports of the time. The testimony of those who were there. Eliza Wells returned from death twice before the eyes of the public, and a 3rd time witnessed by only a few. People who carried that secret to their graves. This mystery reminds us that even in the modern age, with all our science and certainty, there are still events that defy explanation, moments that blur the line between life and death, stories that force us to question where the possible ends and the impossible begins. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was explained? Was it simply a medical condition we still don't fully understand? Or was something else at work? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want more dark mysteries like it, subscribe, turn on notifications, and share it with someone who loves the unexplained. See you in the next one.